Steve Parley, Club President, and I'd like to welcome you all to the 12th meeting of the 47th year of the Dublin Worthington Rotary Club. Today's invocation and pledge of allegiance will be offered by Gary.
In an attitude of prayer, we pray to a God who has made everything there is or ever will be. Help us to accept who we are, make us young enough to question, old enough to forget, wise enough to act, helping others, and grateful for all of our blessings. To this, we all say, Amen.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jerry.
You're very good on the amens. You're getting into the habit. Thank you very much.
All right, Teresa,
Yes.
put down the toes and
Yes.
pick up the guest list, please.
We have a couple of speakers here with us that'll be announced later. Drew, you are with Joe. If you want to introduce him for us, Joe.
I would like to, thank you. Drew Penta is one of my colleagues at my office and a fine lawyer and would be an excellent candidate for this club. But Tri-Village has already claimed him, so.
And we have Hannah. Steve, you want to introduce Hannah?
Yes, Hannah is from Park National Bank. She just started there 5 weeks ago. Yep, and come to check out our club today. So, thank you for coming.
And we have almost no more guests. Jim Allen's with us again today. Welcome.
Welcome, Jim.
Will be introduced at a later time.
Yes.
I think that's all. Do we have anybody on Zoom?
No, these looks like the regular crowd.
Same old, same old. All right.
I'd also like to welcome Dave, our newest member, which at some point we will induct you and make it official. Just, I've got to figure out how to do that first.
Welcome.
All right. So yes, we do have a program today, but first we have a sergeant, and I think it's Alan.
Breathing.
Thanks, Steve. Harry Bouquet Martin, it's been so long since you've been around. I'm so happy to see you here today. And I would be honored if you would carry this pot after even throwing a buck in, just because somebody's got to get it started. And while Harry's making his way up here, happy dollars. I'm not going to forget them this time. Katie, you were so fast.
Well, I have ecstatic dollars. My son's band group, the Worthington Billboard Band, won their first invitational competition last Saturday. They came in third for their other competition they did on Saturday. It was a busy day. And also at that Grove City competition, not only did they win best in band, but they also won best in percussion, which my son's in. So
Great. Also great to see you, sir.
Oh, yes. It's raining.
Is it poinsettia time?
I have a fistful of dollars.
Awesome.
Tomorrow will be Nancy and my 60th wedding. I get my booster shot for COVID. The 7th of October, I've been chosen to go on the honor flight to Washington, D.C.
wow.
Plane departs at 0500 hours.
Go right ahead, Pete.
I'd like to put in $2 Cheryl Roller, very good friend of Judy and mine, along with her husband, Chuck Taylor. Judy will be introducing the two, and Elizabeth from the women League of Women. Voters. I never worked one of them.
Somewhere along the way.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Dick,
A little,
or John, excuse
a
me.
little ashamed, man, I almost forgot. Last Thursday, I made a hole in one.
Yeah. Fantastic.
How many holes in one?
That would be 7.
All
My
right.
goodness. I can get a 7 on any par 3.
All that means is I played a hell of a lot of golf.
There you go.
Gave myself a lot of chances.
Mr. Motley.
Yes. Well, this morning I had coffee with the dean of my law school, from which I was graduated 30 years ago. And I'm just grateful both that the James College of Law exists, and there are a lot of law schools like that make it possible for someone to make a career change by offering evening programs.
Yeah,
That's one of those people
fantastic, great.
that made that career change, so.
Thank you. Dave, please.
All right, so I'm new. I'm Dave, in case you guys haven't figured out who I am yet. The guy who wears uniform every week. It's great, it's comfortable. $2 because we found out my wife is pregnant with number 2. Because I'll be joining you on our flight, sir.
Fantastic. I got that a couple.
I just got home from 2 glorious weeks in the island.
Oh, nice. Fantastic. And behind you, Barry.
Well, I'm gonna pay $1 because this is the only place that I can call a state highway patrolman by his first name.
Depending on how you see him and when, perhaps.
Right here.
Any other happy dollars? Nick? Oh, sorry.
So I have to say it tonight because we play our rival high school in volleyball on Thursday. ONTNG Liberty is #1 private high school in the state for volleyball. And we play our rival Orange, who's right behind us. We're actually #3 in the state and #54 in the nation. Wow. You guys have nothing to do on Thursday night.
All right. Nick?
The Worthington Resource Pantry home stretch virtual 5K is next week. Almost over here and I can move on to the next thing. But if you have not yet registered, it's still time to do so. We've got a great t-shirt and a sticker and support food insecurity here in Central Ohio. So
Fantastic. All right. Okay. Anybody else happy today?
Yes, we're just happy.
Just a happy bunch. All right then. Well, let's see, we issue everybody name badges and I don't see anybody that's, well, I only see one person maybe that's not wearing it. So if you're not wearing one, throw a buck in. And if you're good enough to wear your name badge, that's awesome. But if you didn't wear your Rotary pin today, and I know we've given everybody one, but that's another good reason to throw $1 in there. Just saying. Anybody in this room a golfer?
No.
I mean, just saying. Well, okay, so is there anybody in this room that participated in or sponsored a hole at our good friend Bill's memorial tournament this past Monday? Raise your hand if you played, or if you sponsored a hole, or if you did anything for it. And if your hand's not up in the air, throw in a buck. Appreciate that. Throw in a buck. We see every week, okay, this is a 4-way test, as Jerry would say. Every week or so, we see a newsletter come by. Katie works really hard on it. Who in here read the newsletter that came out this week?
Oh, thank you.
If you're a member. If you're not a member, you didn't count. So if you didn't read the newsletter, please throw another $1 in there. And then I'll leave you all alone because everybody was so happy and we have a great program. But I will leave you with this thought. Why is it that elevator jokes are so good and so classic? Well, they can be told on many levels. Thank you, everybody. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you. I was gonna say because it's so uplifting, but I don't know.
I said they go down.
A lot of good answers there. All right, if anybody has any announcements, please stand up and wander up this way. I will make a couple. The board has voted, the board has spoken. We are moving to lunches temporarily, starting in November. So we will still have our next 2 breakfasts, but they will be Zoom only. So do not come here for breakfast. And then we will have 2 lunches that will be just like this. And then we're going to move to lunches for the foreseeable future until we're through COVID, until maybe we get back to Trillium, just to keep things simple. So keep an eye out on the weekly notices, just so you make sure you know you're going to the right spot. We also have a 5th Wednesday this month, and we're going to have a rah-rah, but it will be a strategic rah-rah. And I will strategically place wine or beer or liquor in your hands if you come. But we will also talk about strategic planning for the club. As you guys know, the club met early August. Some of us met and discussed the strategic plan, and so I want to share that with everybody in the club. It will be recorded, but we'd love to have everybody there in person if possible, and it will be at the Cohatch. It's called the Hardware Store. I think it's right across from the Whitney House in Worthington. But you should have gotten an email from Katie about details. Please sign up so that we know how many to expect. Any other announcements? Really? No one?
Bill Shantz's memorial
Oh,
was a great success.
it was fantastic. My team came in last, but we still had a great time.
But the key is your team was there.
Correct. Right.
Hey, Steve,
Yes.
can you remind the people that about we have the upcoming food drive on October 16th, and we need volunteers. So please email Andrew St. Olds if you want to volunteer.
To reiterate, the food drive needs volunteers, so please email Andrew St. Olds if you are able to volunteer. Jerry.
There's been some discussion about the memorial tournament for Bill. And so you should all know that you, represented by this club, donated $500 to that tournament because the proceeds go to melanoma research.
Melanoma Education Foundation.
Is the entity that actually benefits from that. But your board approved that donation, and because we play in it, and because of Bill's memory and what he gave to this club while he was here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. All right, I think we're now ready for our program. Judy, you're gonna make some introductions.
So it's my pleasure to introduce the woman who's going to introduce the speaker. I want you to know Cheryl Roller is president of the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus. Before retiring in 2014, Cheryl worked in the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, and for government. Most recently, she was vice president of marketing and strategic communications for the United Way of Columbus, or Central Ohio, sorry. And prior to that, she served 23 years as senior director of marketing for Time Warner for the Central Ohio region, and started her career as a financial and management analyst for the city of Columbus. Cheryl has volunteered on the board of trustees for Ballet Net, Columbus Library Council, Literacy Council, and the Columbus USA Association. She earned her MBA and MPA from the Ohio State University. And just as an aside, I want you to know that she's a woman of great integrity. She's enthusiastic, she's resourceful, and she beats me at golf a lot. Cheryl?
Thank you, Judy. Judy's actually the better golfer. She's just being very generous today. Thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And we're delighted that Judy and Pete were able to arrange this so that we could come and talk about redistricting and fair districts. Before I introduce Elizabeth, I'd just like to say a few words about the League of Women Voters. First and foremost, the mission of the League of Women Voters is to empower voters and to defend democracy. And we do this by encouraging active participation in government, by working to increase understanding of major public policy issues like gerrymandering, which is what we're going to talk about today. And we also do this by influencing public policy through education and advocacy. One of the most important points I want to make is that the League is always nonpartisan, which is different than bipartisan. And you'll even hear some discussion today by Elizabeth talking about Republicans or Democrats, but that's because of the role they're playing in gerrymandering in Ohio right now. And I will tell you, both Republicans and Democrats have been bad about gerrymandering, not only in Ohio, but across the nation as well. But what you're going to hear today is a nonpartisan presentation. So as a nonpartisan organization, we never endorse parties, we never endorse candidates, but we do sometimes take stands on issues like gerrymandering, but only after we very thoroughly researched it. And that's what gives us our ability to have a great reputation and to be sought out by members of both sides to give perspectives on important issues. So it's my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Grieser, the Operations Manager for the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus. Elizabeth has worked in the nonprofit sector since the beginning of her career. For the past 7 years, we've been delighted to have her serve as the Operation Manager for the League of Women Voters of Metro Columbus, where she's our only paid staff person. She oversees all of our voter outreach, our voter education, and our advocacy programs, along with managing a membership base of more than 400 very active civic volunteers. Previously, she worked for the Equal Justice Fellow. Previously, she worked as an Equal Justice Fellow of the Ohio Legal Services Association, where she specialized in consumer, foreclosure, and public benefits litigation. She holds a BA from the Washington University in St. Louis and a Juris Doctorate from The Ohio State University. After the presentation, she'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Elizabeth?
I just try holding it first. I feel like if I clip it, it's gonna. But thank you so much for having us here today. I wanted to start by saying that I am a Worthington resident. I've lived here for 4 years. I have 2 kids in the Worthington School District. And as a small local announcement, the League is hosting 2 different candidate forums in Worthington over the next couple of weeks. The first one is going to be October 5th at the McConnell Arts Center. It's going to have Worthington City Council and School Board. It's going to be in person, so if you want to come and ask a question, you're welcome to do that. The second one is school board only. We're doing that with the PTAs, and it's going to be at WEC. It's going to be virtual, so the candidates will be in person, but we'll be filming and sending it out to everybody. So mark your calendars. We want everyone to be an informed voter, and remember to vote on November 2nd. So, okay.
Sorry, that was me.
But today I'm here to mostly speak about redistricting. And I have a fairly short presentation. If you have questions while I'm going through it, please, raise your hand and interrupt me. Redistricting can be a bit dry. So if you have like specific examples of gerrymandering or redistricting that you want to bring up, please feel free to do so. The league has been involved with redistricting and advocating for fair districts here in Ohio for about the last 4 decades. So we are in this for the long haul. We get geared up every 10 years and we go through this process. This time we have new rules in place, and I'll be going over that in a little bit, but this year's a little different. How do I go to the next slide?
The arrow key on the right.
Thank you.
Did it work? There it is. Oh. Is this how gerrymandering starts?
Yes, it starts with technical problems.
It starts in the dark.
Can't get it to work.
Sorry, we'll start.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Left or right? What's
Okay.
that?
So this year, the league has partnered with a number of other nonpartisan, nonprofit voter rights organizations across Ohio so that we can send out one unified message about redistricting and gerrymandering. And so our informal coalition is called Fair Districts. We are one of the 2 lead organizations. The other is Common Cause Ohio. But it includes a lot of different organizations throughout the state. And we are giving this same presentation to groups throughout Ohio, just like yours, and we've been doing that since March. So this is, we're months into giving this presentation, and the point is to really increase awareness of what redistricting is, what gerrymandering is, and how we can advocate for fair districts. So to back up a little bit, I don't know if you remember, but about 6 years ago, Ohio voters passed a constitutional amendment to put in additional safeguards for redistricting state legislative districts. And then they did the same thing in 2018. So although this happened, 6 and 3 years ago, this year, 2021, is the first time we are putting these new rules in place. So the whole thing is an experiment. And this is an interesting time for me to be giving this presentation because we are right in the middle of redistricting right now. The important thing I want to point out about these constitutional amendments is that they had very broad voter support, and they had support in all of 88 of Ohio's counties. So it's not just urban voters, it's not just rural voters, but all counties in Ohio passed this reform. Yep.
Did it break?
I think I got off of it again somehow. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
You'll have to look up there.
Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about today. What is redistricting and why are we doing it? Why is it important to have fair districts? What are these new rules that voters passed, and how are they going to help us draw new maps? And then what you all can do to ensure that we have fair maps and other ways you can get involved if you're interested. So this is just a general overview of what redistricting is and why we do it. The top picture up here is an example of a district we might have drawn in 2011 for equal districts with 5 people in each one. Over the decade, people move out of state, people migrate to different areas of the state, and the population gets a little dispersed. So when the census comes out every 10 years, we have to redraw district lines. And what I mean by redrawing district lines is the Ohio House and Senate districts with the Ohio legislature, and then also the congressional districts. So when we're redrawing the Ohio legislative districts, we have the same number of districts every year, 99 House districts, 33 Senate districts. So we're just redrawing the lines, so we've got equal population in all the districts. For the congressional districts, there's an added layer of complexity because this year we found out we'll be losing one of our congressional districts. We'll be going from 16 to 15 districts. So not only are we going to be redistricting to even out the population, but we'll also be redrawing the districts so that there's only 15.
Was that because we've lost population or just shifted it around?
It's actually, Ohio did gain in population, but it did not grow as much as other states such as Texas and California, because there's only a set number of congressional districts in the whole United States. You have to, yeah, right. So we didn't grow as much as other states, and that means that we lost a congressional district. And the trend was that the states on the outer edges of the United States tended to grow more than the middle of the country. And so those states are adding districts, and the Midwest is losing districts generally.
Could I ask, how did that national or federal law or regulation come about that there are only a fixed number of congressional districts? How long has that been?
Since the founding of the country, it started in the 1700s. I think it's in the Constitution. Yes, is that correct? Probably some other attorneys in here. It's in the Constitution that we. Okay. So each state is afforded one district, and then the rest are apportioned based on population. So even if we shrunk to a population of 100 people, Ohio would still have one district seat. And two senators, yes. But we don't have to district for senators because everybody just gets two. Oh, sorry. So district lines are an opportunity to grab political power. And I'm just going to echo what Cheryl already said, and that I will be talking a lot about Republicans gerrymandering here in Ohio because that is the political party that is in power. However, other states like Maryland have the opposite situation in which their districts are mostly gerrymandered in favor of Democrats. So while I'm using these political party names, it is not because we are advocating for a particular party to have more districts than another. It's just the nature of the beast, and gerrymandering has been around since the 1700s in this country. So it's been here for a long time, and we are just trying to get the word out about it and what you can do about it. So as you can tell here, we've got a population of 20 cats, 30 dogs. You can draw districts so that the dogs have power in all the districts and the cats have zero representation. You can also draw districts so that there are 3 cat districts and 2 dog districts, meaning the cats are in the majority, even though number-wise they're in the minority. So this is just an example of why district drawing is so powerful and how it can have such consequences depending on who is drawing the districts. But again, why do we care? You know, so what if one of the political parties wants to draw districts in their favor? We know based on decades of research that drawing gerrymandered districts creates safe districts with predictable election outcomes. And really what that means is that the politicians are picking their voters and not the voters picking their politicians. And I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. We also know that if you have these predictable outcomes, you have more unresponsive elected officials because they're not being held accountable. They may not be held accountable by their voters. We also know that gerrymandered districts mean that less people are going to vote. People think, why should I bother voting? Because I know so-and-so is going to win because they're with X political party. And then something that I think is really the most interesting is that it takes the attention away from the general election in November and puts it in the primary. So for example, if you live in a district that always goes to the Democrats, the election you're going to care about is in May, when there are 3 or 4 Democrats running against each other. Whoever wins that primary is most likely going to win the November election. And that can create extreme candidates that get in office. And we've seen that in a number of situations. This is a picture of what Ohio's congressional districts look right now. There are some interesting shapes, and I want to say that just because it's a weird shape doesn't necessarily mean it's gerrymandered. There could be a number of reasons why it's drawn that way. My favorite district that I like to point out is this bright yellow one here at the top. It's called the Snake on the Lake. And you aren't able to drive straight through it. You'll have to stop, go through Lucas County and Ottawa County. And then you have to go through another district to follow the rest of the district. We also have interesting situations here in Central Ohio. I live in District 12, probably most of you do as well if you live in Worthington or Dublin. And there's like some interesting lines that are drawn through Worthington and Clintonville, which collect some more Democrat-leaning voters and lump them in with people that live in more rural Republican-leaning counties. So that's an example of gerrymandering as well. But like I said, just because the shapes look odd and they're not perfect circles or perfect squares, that doesn't mean that a district is gerrymandered. I think this chart really points out that districts in Ohio are gerrymandered because in the last 8 to 10 years, we've had approximately 55 voters voting Republican in Ohio, 45% voting Democrat. But when you look at the congressional seats in Ohio, 75% are Republican, 25% are Democrat. And we want to see more representational fairness. So we want these two pie charts to be about equal. And you can see that this is true to a certain lesser extent for the state house elections as well. So all of that, what I just covered, that's what things look like now. And we are in the process of redrawing the district lines this year, 2021. When you vote in the elections in November, like for example, if you live in the 15th district, there is going to be an election this year for the 15th district in November. You're still going with those old district lines. And these new district lines will take effect in next year in 2022. Okay, so now we get down to the details of the new rules and what is going on. There are two different processes that I want to talk a little bit about. One is rules for drawing district maps for the Ohio State Legislature. The constitutional amendment that voters approved about 6 years ago puts in place this 7-member group. They're called the Ohio Redistricting Commission. They're all elected officials. And it is their job to approve district lines for the Ohio legislature. It turned out that 5 of these positions are Republican and 2 are Democrat, and that's because of who we have elected as our state leaders. So for the last month, this commission has been very busy. And they have been soliciting community drawn maps. They've held public hearings. And last week they approved these 2 maps for House and Senate districts for the new district lines starting in 2022. Now, we are not very happy with these maps, and I'll tell you why. These are even more gerrymandered than the current maps. It's hard to tell from these maps, But I just wanted you all to have a picture of what they look like. And some of the reasons that we're frustrated is because these maps here were introduced by the Republicans in the legislature. They were introduced to the commission. The commission then heard hours of testimony of how these maps did not comply with the constitutional requirements for representational fairness, but they voted along party lines to accept them anyways with no amendments, no changes. So now that I'm giving this presentation at this particular point, because these were just passed last week, you may think, what was the whole point of us even passing these constitutional amendments? So, I did want to let you know that this is an interesting time for me to be giving this presentation, but also this is not the end of the road. The next steps will most likely be that groups involved with fair districts will be taking these maps to court, to the Ohio Supreme Court, for the Supreme Court to enforce the constitutional requirements that were voted on by voters 6 years ago. So it's not particularly surprising, I guess it's not particularly surprising to me that this happened. But I also, I think that the politicians, of course, don't want to give up the power that they have to draw maps the way they want to. And they're testing to see if they actually have to follow these requirements. So we're going through the process. I am not in charge of the advocacy steps for fair districts, but I can pretty much tell you that we'll be going to court. Hopefully the Ohio Supreme Court will say that they have to follow the requirements of the Constitution. And then we can have some amended maps. And when we go through this again in 10 years, they will know that the constitutional requirements have to be completed.
Well, I know you're not sure of that because we already have a precedent, and that's school funding. The Supreme Court ruled several times. It's never been changed.
Yeah, so, it's hard to give this presentation because I cannot tell you for sure what's going to happen. And like I said, the league has been fighting for this for 40 years. This is not something that we can magically have some new rules and then things will be 100% better. I do think that these rules have helped some. And like I said, we're still in the middle of the process. I don't know what's going to happen. But one is that it's gotten this process out into the light a little bit more. In 2011, the maps were drawn in a conference room in a hotel. No public hearings. We didn't know really even who drew the maps other than the legislature and what they were considering. So we have been, we've had rallies, lots of people testify, we have lots of people introduce community maps that show that it is possible to draw fair maps that have representational fairness. So I think that's a big thing, just getting people aware of the problem and hopefully holding their politicians accountable.
So, two things. One, how did they use the old shit way of using the old map instead of the new map? I mean, the old map, they said, oh, well, 64, 46, but we've had 75 and 80% of the legislature, so if we add them together, we get 65, 35, and that's what we've done. So what's wrong with that? And I thought that was what happened. What does the specific rule require in terms of proportional representation?
Yeah, there's a number of requirements. It requires representational fairness, which basically match how voters are voting, Republican or Democrat, to the districts. It requires some minority representation, so minority representation in districts. It requires, the rules require transparency and public participation. Our big thing is really representational fairness. And we're not trying to get every district to be competitive because That's impossible, and I'm not even sure that we would want every district to be competitive. But the way things are drawn right now, hardly any districts are competitive, and really based on the number of voters and how voters are voting, this does not represent Ohio voters. And we have another process to go through, which will be starting in a week or two, and that will be redrawing congressional districts. I don't know how it's gonna go, but I feel like we've had a taste of how it might go. So we have similar rules for that based on the constitutional issue that was passed about 3 years ago. Bipartisan map making, limits on splits of counties, transparencies, and public participation. So one of the important things to consider here is that counties are supposed to be the building blocks for the congressional districts. Before we didn't have any basis. We didn't have any basis for how districts were drawn, so we're trying to keep counties together more, and that should make for more intuitive districts. I'm not really going to go through this. It's a very detailed chart of how the process is supposed to take place. The difference between the congressional districts and the state legislative district map making is that the General Assembly gets the first crack at making the districts this time. And they are supposed to have a certain number of minority party agreement in order to get the maps through. If that doesn't work, it's going to go to the commission and then back and forth, and eventually, most likely, to the courts. So that process is going to be starting hopefully in a week or two, and we should have some maps by the end of November.
One other question.
Go ahead.
Both DeWine and Rosa said that we attempted to make a compromise, but no one would compromise. What is your take on that? Who was not compromising?
Well, those discussions were not done in the public hearing, so we don't know for sure. So I really can't say if there was any good faith negotiating happening. Since there were absolutely no edits at all on the maps after they were introduced to when they were approved, I tend to think that perhaps there weren't, but again, I wasn't in on those discussions. So we are trying to keep the pressure on our elected officials, and we would like to ask for your help in doing that. And that can be done simply by just contacting your state representative, your state senator, and saying, hey, I care about fair districts. I want to see you make a good faith effort to draw districts that represent me and my neighborhood.
The maps that have been accepted are only good for 4 years rather than 10, is that correct?
That is correct.
And so is that a plus or a minus?
I think that's a minus. In my opinion, it's a minus because then we have to go through the whole process again in 4 years, and we won't have new census data. We can only do this with national census data. So we'll be going through the process again, using more taxpayer dollars when we should be getting 10-year maps, good 10-year maps that we can use for a decade. Sure.
Elizabeth, talk about the contests, the map making contests.
So Fair Districts sponsored a map making contest. There were cash prizes, and we had quite a few entries. I should have brought an example of what one of the contest winners were, but they were maps of the Ohio Senate, congressional, and House districts complying with all the constitutional requirements, with an explanation of why they drew the map that way. Why did they draw, 3 House districts in this area? Why did they decide to keep these neighborhoods together and separate these towns? So I think just reading those narratives, it's really interesting to think of everything that goes into drawing district maps. It's not as easy as just saying, okay, well, Franklin and Delaware County, they should be together. You have to think about not just population, but what's important in your community. So, you know, maybe Franklin and Licking County are more similar in terms of what their schools are like, their populations like, what kind of jobs and things are going on around there. So there's a lot to consider when it's not easy to draw district lines.
Yeah, and the point of that contest was that members of the general public could easily draw maps.
Yes.
That meet
Cheryl
all
drew
of the
her own maps.
criteria. You know, it's, and there was free software provided
Yes.
that any member of the public could use that gave you feedback on how you were doing and meeting the criteria. So there were lots of good alternatives. And the people who came to the hearings and testified brought maps. Some of them that they put up on big poster boards, some of them that they showed electronically. But it's doable. You can make good, fair maps that aren't packed, that aren't stacked, that are fair to the voters, such that every voter has an equal vote. Their vote is not discounted.
Yeah, that's right. And all the information that I just talked about and any updates, any kind of information you might want to get, like a yard sign or postcards to send to your legislatures, you can find that all on fairdistrictsohio.org. So I'd encourage you to look that up. And I can take questions now if anyone has any specific questions about redistricting.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me? So you mentioned that this November, the current districts are in effect. So when is the deadline for the new districts to be determined for the next voting cycle?
So the deadlines are by the end of November that we should have the new districts. Things are a little up in the air because if they do go to court, we may not be able to have district maps by the end of November. This was also compounded by the fact that we were supposed to get census data in March or April, and we didn't get it till the middle of August. So we couldn't even start drawing maps until the middle of August. You know, there is a definite crunch time because we're facing May 22 elections in which the House of Representatives candidates are going to be running in their primaries, and they need to know who are their voters, who are their districts. So again, this process is not like math in which it's like 1 and 1 equals 2. It's a little up in the air, and I have not been involved in previous decades work with fair districts, but the deadlines in 2011 were not complied with either. We still ended up with districts, things still worked out. So we're hoping by the end of November, but like I said, I wouldn't count on it. How's that for a reassuring answer? Yes.
Elizabeth, with our population of 330 million people in the United States, still 435 House of Representatives members. We've now moved to a place where it's 758,000 people, if my math is right, per district.
Correct.
And it used to be 300,000, et cetera, et cetera. Is the league, or is there any movement afoot nationwide to be able to say, maybe we need to adjust the number of 435 and make it twice that many, 707 or 807 or something?
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. And I do know in the 1700s, when they started this, each House of Representative member represented about 34,000 people. So now we are 10 times that many.
Right.
I personally have not heard of a movement afoot to do that, but it's possible. Has anyone else heard of anything? No?
Just add a comment though.
Sure.
At the original constitutional convention, George Washington proposed exactly one amendment to the final draft, which was defeated. Now, one amendment would have established a maximum $25,000 for 25,000 population per representative district.
Okay.
Because he felt that given the size of the country at the time, if you got bigger than that, people wouldn't know their member of Congress, they wouldn't be accountable to. And
Yeah.
interesting, it's concerning that.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting, and I mean, there's been discussion over, do small states like Rhode Island deserve to have 2 senators, the same as Texas, when they're, so there's, I don't
That's the
foresee
leveling-
anything changing.
That's the
but
leveling factor, though.
yeah, that is the leveling factor. Yes.
The Senate versus the House.
Right.
I've done a little reading on that, Pete, and the final line is that unless we would start to get a vote, it'll never, ever happen. Because what it means is that every current representative loses a little bit of power. There's also, it's always 2 sides to the coin. And since we're both bankers, how much is that going to cost? Congress likes to spend money, and when I have to support 700 of them instead of 400 of them, it won't go up proportionately. We know that.
Right.
And but what's kind of unfair is, as you pointed out, states with little population, think of Vermont, and how many people those folks actually represent. And they've got the same amount of voting power as my Congress. So it's as they say, it's messy. Don't look at making sausage.
So that's what I want you all to get out of this presentation is a little more knowledge of how the sausage is made here in Ohio, and you can talk to your friends and neighbors about redistricting and just let them know that it's happening, and keep your eye on the news because there are going to be articles in the local paper and on the radio about these maps. So keep your eye out for them and kind of follow along, because we want the public to be involved in this process, and we don't want it to go back to being decided in a conference room somewhere in a hotel.
Mr. Motley?
Yes.
I'm always putting people on the spot, so you might as well join the crowd. If you're of a mind, you might write us a letter that we could put on our website or email to all of us, so that I don't have to try to write something that nobody's going to read anyway. But they'll be able to put a hash mark down for how many of these we got.
And what I can do is we have letter to the editor templates and things so that you are not reinventing the wheel, and I can send that information to you. Okay.
I'll get you my card.
Okay.
I'm the communications.
Okay. And so if you're interested in sending a letter to the editor, or just interested in doing a couple posts on the Rotary social media, you can use those. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
I have another. Has there ever been a league of men voters?
Well, there has not. That's because I think that was called the Constitutional Convention. We were founded the year that women got the right to vote. And so we're a little bit like the Rotary, but opposite in that we started accepting men as members in the 70s. And we do have men that are on our board and our great. So thank you.
Do they just get a half a vote?
Yeah. Thank you again, Elizabeth and Cheryl, for joining us today. It was a great presentation, so thank you. Our speaker next week will be me, and again, I am bribing you with alcohol and food and a good time, so please come. Before we wrap up, we have a raffle.
There's $20. Three, 4, 6, 604. In the cards, there's $181. Ace of spades. 3, 4, 6, 6, 7, 5.
That's me.
All right.
Come on up.
All these tickets.
Yeah.
That worked
It's
for
kind of
you.
like Jeremy. I just pick that one up.
I know.
He stacked the deck.
That's it. Right up there.
All right.
That's cool.
Over the ace of spades, where would I be hiding?
Right there.
Probably here.
King of clubs. All right. Thank you, everybody. And before we adjourn, we have, as always, the four-way test. Please join me in the recital of the things we think, say, and do.
Is it
Wait.
Is it truth?
Oh, sorry.
Did I share it? I don't think I shared it.
I think you're still in the presentation.
There we go. All right. Of the things we think, say, and do. First.
Is it truth?
Second.
Is it fair for all concerned?
Third.
Will it build goodwill and better friendship?
And four.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you all. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Yes.